Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. The terrifying Robocop invasion has begun, in the extremely intimidating form of Qingyi. Qingyi is here to zap some sense into the stun meta. Today's ultimate guide video will have you wired up with everything you need to know about Qingyi. Since the last first impressions video, Qingyi got buffed. And when I say buffed, I mean she hit the gym harder than a New Year's resolution. They cranked her stun multiplier up from 60% to 80%, a sparktacular increase, along with a few other buffs and some side grades that are sure to cause a few sparks of debate. I was truly stunned by these changes. Now, this video was filmed on the Creator Experience server, name not pending, and while there may be changes, it's unlikely for there to be additional changes before release, although now I'm eating my hat and may have to edit future disclaimers. Anyway, if there are even more changes, I'll pin them down in the comments below. This is still a test version and does not reflect the quality of the final game. We'll go over Qingyi's kit, her best drives, recommended wenjins, Mindscapes, best teams, a showcase, and finally my opinion on Qingyi. And before we dive into the nitty-gritty, Qingyi is first and foremost a stunner. And you might be stunned that she also deals non-negligible damage. Introducing the, while she does do non-negligible damage, damage shouldn't be her main focus concept, which is why we'll be focusing on her main value, stunning the enemy into submission, which she does with shocking efficiency. Okay, so I've been really deliberating on how to best approach this guide. Initially, I had typed up a 1,000 word breakdown of every detail about her kit, when it can really just be razored as follows. Smash fast with big stick, then poke enemy with stick. But I decided, well, I typed it all out already, so let's do this. Starting with Qingyi's basic attacks, which are her donuts and butter. Get it? Because normally it's bread and butter, but Qingyi is a cop and cops like donuts and Qingyi is a cop, so therefore Qingyi likes... Anyway, the real magic happens on the third part of her basic attack. This is where things get really interesting. You can mash that basic attack button like it owes you money, and Qingyi will keep the party going with endless B3 slams. B3 mashing is a key part of Qingyi's kit, as it dishes out decent days, but more importantly, it's the fastest way for her to generate voltage. And trust me, you'll want to see what happens when she's fully charged. Now, depending on how many B3s you squeeze out before your index finger goes on strike, when you stop mashing the basic attack button, Qingyi will either do her basic attack 4 or enhanced basic attack 4. When you're just mashing B3s, her enhanced basic 4 will be available after the shiny light appears, along with a shiny sounding noise. Funnily, since Qingyi's B3 was buffed a lot to deal a lot more days, Qingyi's B4s aren't as useful post-buff since they don't deal much more days per second and they generate less voltage. However, they are swap cancelable, and Enhanced Basic 4 is a heavy attack, allowing it to start a chain. Now, another very important property of her B3 is that you're able to dash during it without interrupting the combo string. Thanks to her Energizer batteries, even after dashing during her B3, she'll continue to spam her B3 right after her dash. This allows her to reposition, dodge stuff, and chase down enemies without needing to restart her combo string, which is very convenient and makes Qingyi the flexible and powerful stunner that she is. Her B3 and B4s have a 40% damage reduction and some additional interrupt resistance, allowing Qingyi to much more comfortably tank and spank the enemy. And now we've reached the crispiest part of the donut of her kit, her Enchanted Moonlit Blossoms. These still fall under her basic attacks. When Qingyi has 75 or more voltage, as indicated by this little tick on her voltage bar and it turning yellow, holding the basic attack button will cause Qingyi to perform her Enchanted Moonlit Blossoms. Enchanted Moonlit Blossoms is split into two parts, Rush and Finishing Strike. Rush consists of the first flurry of 5 rapid thrusts, and the Finishing Strike is the climactic finishing thrust where Qingyi is also invincible throughout it. You can also release the basic attack button early during the rush portion to prematurely end the rush part and to go straight into the finishing strike. This all ties into her core ability to increase the enemy stun multiplier. Speaking of which, when an enemy stun multiplier is higher, they take more damage while they're stunned. which is where Qingyi's true value comes from. In this example, Zhu Yuan is doing 40% more damage while the enemy is stunned. However, some enemies have a 150% base stun multiplier, and Qingyi bumps that up to 230%, which is a 53.33% increase to your damage to that stun target. Okay, so there's a lot of mumbo jumbo in her core ability, but basically, hitting an enemy with the entirety of her Enchanted Moonlit Blossom Rush and then landing the finishing strike leads to 10 stacks of subjugation against a boss enemy, with each stack adding up to 4% stun multiplier. Since you can have up to 20 stacks of subjugation, this means that it can go up to 80% additional stun multiplier. So against a boss, you'll want to land 2 full Enchanted Moonlit Blossoms to reach this 80% stun multiplier. Now, stacks of subjugations applied are doubled versus non-boss enemies, so fortunately you only have to land 1 fully enchanted Moonlit Blossom on a non-boss enemy to reach the maximum number of stacks. But wait, that's not all. If Qingyi is attacked during the finishing strike portion, which she's invincible during, it will apply 10 stacks of subjugation, regardless of how many times Rush hit the enemy. Against elites, you can briefly tell how many stacks are on them because when the finishing strike strikes the enemy, their stun multiplier briefly appears. Against bosses, there's a debuff indicator with the number of subjugation stacks under their health bar. Okay, there was a lot to take in here, but arguably the most important thing about her Enchanted Moonlit Blossom is to prioritize the finishing strike to hit the enemy. If the finishing strike misses, no subjugation stacks are applied to the enemy and thus no additional stun multiplier. You could say that they got away scot-free. Up next, we have her EX Special. She has 2 EX Specials, a tap and a hold version. The hold version is basically 1.3333x the tap version for 1.3333x the energy, going from 60 to 80 energy. Both versions of her EX Special leads straight into her B3, and since these have iframes and essentially replace Qingyi's B1 and B2, these are both great options and should be your go-to option to start a combo with, as her EX Specials are just a strict upgrade over her otherwise unremarkable B1 and B2. As for her dodge counter, this is an important part of her kit as you'll often find yourself dashing during B3 and thus performing dodge counters. Fortunately, her dodge counter leads straight into her B3. Her chain attack also generates 25 voltage, which is nice for expediting your next Enchanted Moonlit Blossom, and is largely mainly applicable against bosses. And her ultimate actually generates an entire 75 voltage, which allows her to immediately perform Enchanted Moonlit Blossom right after her ultimate. As such, her ultimate is actually quite useful to quickly stun an enemy that you know will die during the next stun window, as this will significantly speed up the amount of time needed to stun the enemy, as well as immediately providing an Enchanted Moonlit Blossom. So now that we know the details of most of her kit, let's take a look at this massive chart. This chart contains most of the useful parameters as well as some additional details about her combos. There are a few key takeaways here. As mentioned earlier, her B3s have the best voltage generation besides her ultimate. Her EX combos are her best option, followed by her dodge counter combos, and lastly her basic attack combos, so you should prioritize them in that order. Try your best to start her combos with her EX Special or her dodge counter, and otherwise if the enemy is not attacking and you don't have energy, just use her basic attack 1 and 2 to start her combos. Now keep in mind that for this chart the voltage and frames are both estimations from me meticulously looking at frames, but are likely a bit off here and there, so please take them with a grain of salt. Now I'm already at my wit's end writing and editing all of this, so here's a list of additional details that didn't quite make the cut for meticulous editing. Got it all? Great, because neither did I, and I wrote this damn guide. Anyway, in true Zenless Zone Zero fashion, Qingyi is yet another character that is easy to pick up, but has a lot of little nuances that add complexity and micro optimizations to her gameplay. So we've already touched upon Qingyi's core ability here and there, which gives additional stun multiplier up to 80% stun multiplier at max core level. However, we also need to talk about her faction bonus. Her faction bonus is unique in that she requires an attacker or someone from the NEPS squad to be on her party to provide her with 20% additional days on her basic attacks and some attack based on her impact stat. Her faction bonus is honestly more like getting a free donut at the drive-thru. Nice to have, but still a full meal without the donut. Qingyi oftentimes already overstuns the enemy in the sense that she'll often stun the boss enemy or just even regular enemies before even being able to max out the 80% stun multiplier bonus. But still, it's usually always better to have the option to stun the enemy faster than slower. So enabling her faction bonus will help her stun faster and hit harder. For talent priority, you'll want to prioritize Qingyi's core ability to max out that stun multiplier. However, leveling her talents, while important, isn't as important as leveling a DPS's talents. You get less days per level in comparison to damage per level, as going from level 1 to level 12 talents increases Qingyi's basic attack damage to do around twice as much damage, but only 1.5x the days. Still, you should definitely level her talents, but you shouldn't prioritize them over your DPS's talent levels. Anyway, for her talents, prioritize her basic attacks, followed by her special and dodge, and then her assists, and finally her chain attack can be last. Qingyi, being a stunner first and foremost, has a pretty stunningly straightforward build for her drives. The 4-piece Shockstar Disco is usually her best option to stun the enemy more quickly. On occasion though, the 4-piece Swing Jazz and 4-piece Freedom Blues can be considered in situations where you're stunning the enemies too fast anyway and need those other set bonuses. But for 95% of situations, I recommend the 4-piece Shockstar Disco. Now in terms of the 2-piece set bonus, I personally prefer the 2-piece Swing Jazz so she can have her Hold EX special available more often. But honestly, any 2-piece set bonus like the Thunder Metal or Woodpecker for more damage are just fine. Heck, even no set bonus on those 2 pieces is fine, as long as you fulfill her slot 6 main stat requirement, being impact percent. Speaking of main stats, the most important slot is slot 6, which you should be using impact percent. Again, impact also increases her damage thanks to her passive, which converts impact to attack. As for slot 4 and 5, to maximize her damage output, you'll want crit, usually crit rate, in slot 4 and electric damage in slot 5. However, using attack percent in slot 4 only loses you around 3.4% DPS on average, whereas attack percent in slot 5 loses a more significant 6.7% DPS. Still, despite losing some DPS, her damage isn't too impactful for her team, and you can even use defensive main stats like HP percent or defense percent if you find yourself dying with her. To really hammer in this concept of, while she does do non-negligible damage, damage shouldn't be her main focus concept, the last couple of rows in this chart show a DPS build with the 4-piece Woodpecker Electro on Qingyi and an attack percent slot 6 main stat versus an M0U1 Zhu Yuan. As we can see, even against a non-stunned enemy where Zhu Yuan loses a lot of her damage output, Zhu Yuan's DPS is double that of a DPS Qingyi and triple that of a stun build Qingyi. However, Zhu Yuan's days is comically low at 18.7% of Qingyi's days build, and that's why we have distinct roles like stunners and attackers. Now for substats, to maximize her damage, you'll want the usual crit rate, crit damage, attack percent, and flat attack and flat pen at a tiny bit as well. Although, again, because of the, while she does do non-negligible damage, damage shouldn't be her main focus concept, it's not too important to maximize her damage, so you don't need to spend too many resources on getting amazing substats for her. These are just long-term but low priority goals. Next, let's talk about Qingyi's Wenjins. She actually has a lot to choose from when it comes to Wenjins. Since she mainly cares about stunning faster, almost all the stun Wenjins help her stun faster in some way. However, of these, her signature Wenjin, the Ice Jade Teapot, will be her best option in terms of how fast she stuns the enemy, as well as providing 20% bonus damage to your team once she reaches 15 stacks or more, and given how fast her B3 hits the enemy, this thing will very quickly reach 15 stacks to 30 stacks. Both the 5-star Wenjins, Hellfire Gears, and the Restrained are solid as well, and I do recommend them if you have them and don't plan to pull for a signature. Her best free-to-play option in my opinion is the Steam Oven, and you'll usually have at least 6 stacks on it. The Precious Fossilized Core is also incredible versus enemies with over 75% HP, but it really falls short against enemies under 50% HP. Personally, I prefer the stability of the Steam Oven over the Precious Fossilized Core, but the Precious Fossilized Core definitely has its place. Next, we have the Damara Battery Mark II, which is Ambi's signature Wenjin, which deals a lot more damage than the Steam Oven, but deals notably less days than the Steam Oven. Finally, the Battle Pass 1 6-shooter is usable, but I personally don't think it's worth grabbing this from the battle pass for Qingyi, since the steam oven is completely free to craft and easily craftable up to upgrade level 5. And surprisingly, the 3-star Wenjin Vortex Arrow is quite usable, although this chart only considers the main target's days, so against AoE I guess, it's not as days friendly. And this brings us to the Mindscapes. Mindscapes. Qingyi's Mindscapes are honestly quite interesting, as her Mindscapes enhance your DPS's damage output by so much that it's often worth investing into her Mindscapes for your DPS's damage, more than investing into Mindscapes on your actual DPS. We've got 3 charts to go through though, so stick with me. This first chart mainly focuses on Qingyi's personal performance. As we can see, she steadily gains more days in damage, gaining much more damage than days, and by M6, she's doing around 148% of the days and 227% of the damage of an M0 Qingyi. Her Mindscape 1 is an incredible Mindscape that just does a ton of stuff, providing her full voltage at the start of a fight, 30% more voltage generation, and 15% defense shred. In terms of M1 versus her signature Wenjin though, there's a case to be made for both of them. Do keep in mind that the chance of pulling the Wenjin is 75% instead of the 50-50% chance for characters, but if you lose that 25% Wenjin chance, it feels really bad and doesn't put you closer to getting the next featured character. Despite being a bit more expensive to pull, for risk mitigation purposes, I personally would go for her M1 over her Wenjin. Anyway, her M2 increases the stun multiplier to up to 108% instead of 80% and gives her situationally more days as well. This is a great stopping point for most players that plan to invest a bit more heavily into Qingyi, as the next major gain is at M6. Before M6 though, M3 gives 2 levels to all talents, M4 gives her shield and energy, M5 another 2 talent levels, and M6 gives her a ton of crit damage on her Moonlit Blossom and shreds enemy resistances to all elements by 20%. M6 is an incredibly great Mindscape. This next chart shows all the buffs she provides and when, and this next chart shows how much damage Zhu Yuan gains during a stun window. We can see that going up to M2 U1 will basically double Zhu Yuan's damage in comparison to just using Ambi as an example. So yeah, she provides massive damage buffs during a stun window. Qingyi is incredibly flexible when it comes to teams, just like how she needs to be when performing her crazy attacks. Her faction bonus only requiring her to have an attacker on her team or someone from the same faction provides her much more freedom than those that she arrests. Overall, in my opinion, her best team is Zhu Yuan, Qingyi, and Nicole, currently at least, as things are very ether favored right now, and also Zhu Yuan just complements her incredibly well, doing more damage to stun targets and not wanting to always be on field due to limited ammo. Obviously though, Qingyi will work with literally every attacker in the game. For example, Billy, Qingyi, and Nicole are all really solid together. Korin, Qingyi, Rina make a great team. Nekomata, Qingyi, Nicole is yet another great team. And Soldier 11, Qingyi, and Lucy feel incredible to use as well. Heck, I even had great success without Qingyi's faction bonus with Hyper Piper, Qingyi, and Lucy. And while Qingyi stuns noticeably slower with her faction bonus, the 80% stun multiplier is massively helpful, as that drastically increases Piper's assault nukes. So yeah, on pretty much all these aforementioned teams, currently I believe Qingyi is just the best stunner for all of them. In fact, you can even use Qingyi instead of Lycan on an Ellen team. Now the only team that I personally struggled with the most was a Grace, Qingyi, and Anton team. Maybe I just don't know how to use this team, but my performance with this team was quite poor. Still, in theory, she should work just fine with Anton as well. So as you can see, Qingyi is an incredible stunner that can significantly elevate any DPS character during a stun window. Increasing a boss's stun multiplier from 1.5 to 2.3 is effectively a 53.33% increase to literally every DPS character during that stun window against certain bosses, which makes her a ridiculously great and universal character. So yeah, if you're looking to elevate any attacker, whether that's Zhu Yuan, Soldier 11, or even Billy, Qingyi is the character for you. Now of course, no character is ever future-proof, and I can see a stunless meta rising in the future, but as long as there's a stun, there's a way. Let me know what you think about Qingyi and whether or not you plan to pull for her down in the comments below. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Went to Lose, signing out.